Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the UP Department of Geography webinar. This is the 10th and the final session for of the lecture series for 2021 that we are conducting this year. The Geography webinar is a project collaboration between the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography. I am Joseph Palis and I will be the moderator for this event. Before we proceed, let me just reiterate a few house rules. During the presentation, attendees should be on mute, but we encourage you to interact by typing your comments and questions in the chat box. Questions will be addressed during the open forum. The lecture is being simultaneously streamed in the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. And also please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available for viewing after the event. I am pleased to introduce our speaker for this lecture. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Jesus Federico Hernandez, or Tuting as he is popularly known, not only within our circles, but also in the university. Is an Associate Professor of Linguistics and Coordinator of the Folklore Studies Program of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy of UP. His research interest includes Philippine languages and culture, the documentation of endangered languages in the Philippines, and Philippine folklore. He is a board member of the Asian Association for Lexicography and a member of the Linguistic Society of the Philippines. And if I just give this small tidbit of information, he's also giving a talk at 4 o'clock right after our talk for the Linguistic Society of the Philippines. Other than all of that, he is a hermit. But on a personal note, let me also say that I've known Tuting for several years, being together when we were junior faculty, and we come sort of semi-full circle now that we are doing this particular talk at our stage of our careers. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Professor Tuting Hernandez.
Let me share my screen. All right. So can you see it? Can you hear me? Okay. A few months ago, Joseph invited me to deliver a lecture sa webinar na ito. And natigilan ako ng konti kasi I was thinking, what do I want to talk about for a linguistics and geography webinar? It's not because na wala kang masyadong connections yung dalawa. It's just because ang dami-daming pwedeng pag-usapan. I was thinking, una, baka interesting for not just the linguists and yung mga geographers din, yung dialectology or tinatawag din namin dialect geography. So it's, looking at yung distribution ng mga languages, figuring out yung mga borders ng mga dialects, mga variations, and all of that. Tapos naisip ko rin na baka maganda rin pag-usapan yung aerial linguistics. Kung saan we look at certain features and see paano siya kumakalat dun sa iba pang mga lugar. So maraming mga topics. Joseph was also suggesting, now why don't you talk about yung storms and how we make sense of yung storms, which is a paper I delivered sa isang conference on folklore. But anyway, nung pinag-isipan ko, naisip ko lang na what if medyo we pull back and at the same time take this opportunity to share the type of linguistics that I do. So naisip ko, let's talk about yung how we conceptualize yung space and how it is reflected in our languages. Kaya naisip ko na tawagin itong Reconstituting space, exploring yung mga place lexicons in Philippine languages. Bilang paglulugar o preliminaries, nais ko lang ibahagi muna yung ilang mga datos tungkol sa mga Philippine languages. Sa kasalukuyan, if you check yung ethnologue is a list compiled by the Summer Institute of Linguistics. So dito nakalista lahat ng mga wika sa sa mundo. The way they do it is through yung mga previous studies and mga reports din ng mga linguists in the field. So para sa Pilipinas, meron tayong nakalista sa kasalukuyan yun sa 2021 na edition na 186 languages. So ganun kadami yung wikang sinasalita sa Pilipinas. Although, dun sa 186 na yun pala, may dalawang na-extinct mula nung nag-started recording. So meron kang 184 living languages. Pero of that, meron tayong 175 na katutubong wika. Kasama din kasi dun sa listahan yung mga wikang sinasalita sa Pilipinas na bagamat hindi sila katutubo, tulad ng English, several Chinese languages, Indonesian, Spanish, as long as may small community of speakers, kasama siya dun sa listahan. So, although if you look at other lists, halimbawa yung sa KWF, they listed I think 130 or something languages. Kung ano-ano pa man yung listahan na pagbabatayan natin, one thing that's quite obvious is that napakataas nung Linguistic Diversity Index dito sa Pilipinas. Ito ay batay dun sa, figures ito ay batay sa SIL 2017, pero dun sa UNESCO na Linguistic Diversity Index, nandun din tayo sa 0.8 something. Ang sistema kasi dito, yung 0, ibig sabihin nun, monolingual yung lipunan, tapos yung 1, yun yung iba-iba na yung sinasalita. So, nandun tayo sa 0.84 na dun sa index. Okay. How do I make sense of this? And ano yung sinasabi ko sa inyo na gusto kong ibahagi din na the type of linguistics that I do? Now, to make sense of this, I think magandang gamitin yung diachronic linguistics. Doon sa diachronic linguistics, titingnan dito yung pagbabago ng wika sa daloy ng panahon. So yung evolution ng language, paano ito nagbabago, at anong ibig sabihin ito sa iba pang mga kaakibat ng mga disiplina. So isa-isang tinitingnan yung mga features ng language from the feature of the sound hanggang dun sa sentence kung paano ito nagbabago. Mabusisi yung proseso. I always tell people na if you're a little bit asocial and obsessive-compulsive, na this is probably the type of linguistics for you. Kasi kailangan mong isa-isahin yung mga tunog at yung mga features ng mga tunog. Okay. Yun yung ginagawa doon sa diachronic linguistics. The thing with language change is that yung wika bilang isang sistema, nakapaloob ito sa mga rules. No? May mga sinusundan itong mga rules. At pati yung pagbabago sa wika, may mga sinusundan din yung mga rules. At dahil doon, pwede natin, as long as ma-identify natin yung mga patterns ng pagbabago, pwede natin i-undo yung rules niya para ma-reconstruct yung earlier form of the language. So doon tayo pupunta sa yung usapan natin ngayong hapon. Because of yung diachronic na mga pag-aaral sa wika, we were able to establish a Proto-Philippine language. Ito yung wika kung saan nagmula ang karamihan sa mga wika sa Pilipinas at ilang mga wika maging sa labas ng Pilipinas. Pag pinag-uusapan kasi natin yung idea of Philippine language, medyo madaming definition. Tulad din bawa nung sa SIL, nilista nila lahat ng mga wikang sinasalita sa Pilipinas. Walang kinalaman yung genetics ng language dun sa listahan na yun. Ngayon, dun sa Proto-Philippine, nakita natin na meron kang mga wika outside of the Philippines that are descendants of Proto-Philippine. Halimbawa, yung isang language sa Taiwan, yung Iami, it's a descendant of Proto-Philippine. Or yung mga languages of Northern Sulawesi, like yung Gorontalo, Mongondo, Minakasan, these are all Philippine languages. Pero meron ka ding mga ilang wika na sinasalita sa loob ng Pilipinas na hindi direct descendants of Proto-Philippine. Kundi mga pinsan sila. Tulad halimbawa ng yung mga Sama-Badjao na grupo, which are Barita languages, hindi sila direct descendants of Proto-Philippine. So, batay dun sa pag-aaral ng mga diachronic linguists, meron tayong in-identify, or si Blas may identify na 9 microgroups within yung Proto-Philippine na grupo. Una dito yung Bashiit. Yung Bashiit, tawag din natin itong Batanic. Ito yung mga wika dyan sa Batanes. Kasama na dyan yung language ng Yami, yung nasa Orchid Island. Yung Cordilleran, ito yung nasa Northern Philippines hanggang sa may Pangasinan. Central Luzon, dito kasama yung Kapampangan, yung mga Sambalic languages, Northern Mangyan. Inati is a language in Panay. Kalamian is Northern Palawan ng mga languages, yung mga nasa mga isla doon sa area na yun. Yung Bilik, ito, dito kasama yung Boli, Blaan, Tihuray. Tapos you have Sangirik, and yung Minahasan niya ay part na nung nasa Northern Sulawesi. No, yung isang malaking grupo dito, yung Greater Central Philippine na group. Okay, yung Greater Central Philippine na group, dito pumapasok yung Tagalog, Bicol, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, Waray, all of that. So yun yung mga Central Philippines. Kasama din dito yung South Mangyan, Palawanik, Manobo, Danao, Subalon, and Gorontalo. Gorontalo is also in Northern Sulawesi. So medyo malawak yung sakop ng Greater Central Philippines. Lahat ng mga wikang ito ay kabilang dyan sa Western Malayo-Polynesian na branch ng Austronesian language family. Nais lang i-klaruhin na when we say Austronesian, Austronesian it's a linguistic na category. It's not about race, it's not about blood, it's not about culture. It's just really about language. Okay. Kailangan natin klaruhin kasi madalas nagagamit yung Austronesian sa kung ano-anong bagay. But when we say Austronesian, really, we're just talking about language. Now all of these languages are related, that they came from the same source, that there are features that were retained from the original source, and features that bind all these different groups together. So yun yung ibig sabihin nung Austronesian dito. Makikita niyo dun sa parang diagram dyan sa baba. Ito yung, this is a rather rudimentary, simplistic na graphic representation noong nangyaring mga splits, and at the same time yung nangyaring movement na rin nung population, nung mga Austronesian speaking peoples. Yung mga wika natin kasama dun sa WMP o yung Western Malayo-Polynesian. Napakalawak ng sakop ng Austronesian kasi if you look at the north-south axis, yung northernmost niya ay yung Taiwan, tapos yung kung saan marami kang mga first order languages, mga first branches dun sa Austronesian language family. Tapos yung pinaka-south na ay New Zealand, kung saan mahatagpuan nyo yung Maori. Yung language ng New Zealand. Pag tingnan naman natin yung east-west axis niya, yung pinaka nandun sa dulo sa east ay yung Easter Island, na politically I think part of Chile, and then nasa kabila naman yung Madagascar, kung saan sinasalita yung Malagasy. So napakalawak nung sakop niya. Tapos pinapalagay natin, or at least yung evidence, linguistic evidence point to Taiwan as the homeland. So isang grupo, yung Malayo-Polynesian, sila yung lumabas at matagal na malagi sa Pilipinas bago tumungong south, and then went west and then east yung iba. Mabilisan yung nangyaring movement papunta dito sa Oceanic, pero medyo nagtagal ng kaunti dun sa Pilipinas. So in a nutshell, yun yung mga ganap dito sa language family na ito, kung saan tayo kasama. Can you imagine, di ba, yung sakop nung buong thing at yung kahalagahan nung posisyon natin doon sa pagkalat ng mga speakers ng wikang ito. Kasi dito muna tumigil sa atin. And I think, batay sa ilang mga linguistic evidence, na-develop talaga yung seafaring capabilities and technologies doon dito sa atin. Okay. And that allowed them to, mabilisan na masakop yung buong Pasifiko. Okay, in terms of yung morphological typology, ang mga wika sa Pilipinas ay tinatawag na agglutinative. Ibig sabihin nito, medyo complex yung mga words natin. Kasi may mga kinakabit tayong mga iba't ibang affixes na nagdadagdag ng kahulugan doon sa kahulugan mismo ng root. All of this will be relevant later. So, yung mga salita natin ay binubuo ng root word, tapos meron ka mga several affixes, or it allows for several affixes. And yung mga affixes na yun ay may mga kanya-kanyang kahulugan. Okay. So, halimbawa nito mga affixes kung saan ito yung mga affixes that indicate place and location and origin ay itong tatlo. Pinili ko lang muna, meron pang iba pero pinili ko itong tatlo ito kasi these are the more productive na mga affixes. Yung taga, yung i at yung suffix na an. Usually when we talk about kung saan galing, origin, madalas gamitin natin yung taga. For example, ako ay taga Bicol, taga dito, taga doon, etc. etc. Okay, yung affix na yun signals agad yung origin. And makikita itong affix na to dun sa iba't ibang mga wika sa Pilipinas. So these are just some examples. Ngayon, marami pa ibang mga examples pero as a tech dinosaur, parang minamano-mano ko kasi yan. Tapos, so medyo nanginginig na yung kamay ko nung naglalagay ako ng mga things sa map. So baka pwede tayong tulungan ng mga kaibigan natin sa geography at mayroon ng mga programa para isalpak na lang yung mga bagay-bagay. Hindi lang kailangan tingnan pa kung tama ba yung linya. Hindi rin eksakto kung saan siya naglaland. Yung iba medyo pataas, yung iba medyo pababa. Anyway, that's what you get for inviting a tech dinosaur to do these things. So, yung taga, it's a perfect indicating a place of origin. Pero, you also see constructions like tagaluto. In the dictionaries, ito yung gawain ng mga lexicographers, pinaghihiwalay nila yung dalawang yan. So meron kang taga 1 at taga 2. Yung taga 1 is origin and taga 2 is occupational. Pero I was thinking, baka isa lang talaga yung taga na ito. And they all refer to not just yung origin o pinanggalingan and not just yung occupation, kundi yung identity mismo. And this is supported then if you look at yung mga family names natin. Kasi I had a chance to work with yung Dictionary of American Family Names na series. Kasi marami ng mga Pilipino sa US, diba? So kailangan nilang ipaliwanag din yung mga apelyido niya. At marami rin tayo makikita ng mga apelyido natin that points to either origin or yung topography, saka yung occupation. So last names like Bondok and Patag and occupational naman yung mga Paet, mga ganon. Mga Agtarap, mga ganon. So these are all occupational. Or Bayani, these are all occupational. So it could be that yung taga really points to identity more than just a place or occupation. Or sometimes kasi, our identity naman is nakatali din naman sa place at sa occupation. So dun sa occupation, ako ay taga-kain, yung iba taga-luto. So may ganun. Okay. So apart from taga, another very productive na prefix, na marker din of location is yung E. Marami kang makikita halimbawa ng mga pangalan ng iba't ibang ethnolinguistic groups or pangalan ng mga lugar na nagsisimula sa I. Halimbawa, Ifugao, Ibaloy, Itawis, Ibanag. etc. And places like Iraya, Ilaod, and all of that. So it's a very productive na prefix that marks location din agad. What's interesting about yung E, kasi yung taga is just, it's a Proto-Philippine innovation. So it only, mahahanap ko na siya dun sa Pilipinas, mga wika sa Pilipinas. Yung E, it's an Austronesian na form. So you can reconstruct it to yung Proto-Austronesian. At namana ito sa maraming mga wika, tulad ng mga wika sa Pilipinas, pero meron ka rin makikita nito sa mga Formosan languages, sa iba pang mga Western Malayo-Polynesian languages like mga Lagasid, Karabata, at maging dun sa mga Oceanic languages like Samoan and Trinidad and all of this. So it's quite a persistent and ubiquitous na marker of location dun sa Austronesian world. Ngayon, kanya dito sa atin, marami na rin mga forms kung saan na-fossilized yung E. Hindi natin siya iniisip na marker pa of anything else. Kasi titingnan natin siya na bahagi na siya nung salita. So words like ibaba and itaas and ibabaw and ilalim, or if you're, sa Bicol yung irarum, ini, ito, lahat ng yun are really complex na constructions where yung E doon indicates yung na it's a location, yung origin kung saan nagmumula yun o kung nasaan yung isang bagay. So, pero dahil medyo fossilized na yung E dito sa mga constructions na to, hindi natin siya napapansin. Pero it's still quite productive. Another affix, yung pangatlo dun sa mga affixes na gusto kong ibahagi ay yung an. And the problem with an is that marami tayong iba't ibang uri na an. Dun sa Panganiban na dictionary, he listed 7 types of an. These are all homophonous. They, pareho yung tunog pero magkakaiba yung kahulugan. Yung ilan doon ay may kinalaman sa lugar. It's a suffix indicating a place where many or much of the root word are found, tulad ng aklatan, palayan, or a place where action is mentioned. Action mentioned by the root word is done, like tahian and buhupitan. Hindi na isama doon sa dictionary na ito na yung an is also an affix used to sa focus system to focus yung location in sentence construction. Halimbawa, kung may sentence ka like, bumili ang dalaga ng candy sa tindahan, if you want to focus yung tindahan, papalitan mo ng an yung verb itself. So, binilhan ng dalaga ang tindahan. Okay. So, yung ganung system of marking kung ano yung nakafocus sa sentence is marked by ito. Suffix na an din. So that's another feature nung suffix na to. It's a verbal suffix marking the locative voice, and it's also a nominal suffix marking location, tulad nga nung nabanggit natin kanina. Also, this is another one of those persistent and important and ubiquitous na suffix na makikita ito sa Formosan, sa Western Malayo-Polynesian, all over yung Austronesian world. So it's reconstructed for Proto-Austronesian. Ngayon, nais ko lang din idagdag yung sa, kasi when we talk about mga markers and affixes, size also an obvious na marker for place. It's also homophonous, you have 11 different forms. Pero meron kang, kadalasan, this marks yung place, origin, and time. Okay. And also, this is an Austronesian locative marker. So, iisipin mo din, may connection ba yung how we structure space dun sa how we structure time? All right. So these are all the markers and affixes as indicators of place. Pero now I want to go to yung mga root words mismo, yung mga salita na kung saan nilalagyan natin ito yung mga nangangahulugan o nagre-represent ng mga lugar, mga features na mahalaga para sa atin. Kailangan ko lang banggitin yung lugar kasi binanggit ko dun sa preliminaries. No? At pinag-uusapan namin doon ni Joseph for quite some time. Now, yung lugar, it's a borrowed term from Spanish. It means place, position, spot, room. And yung tingin kasi doon sa mga borrowed na mga terms. At tingin kasi sa wika, languages man is just product of genetics. They're also products of contact. At yung hiniram natin yung lugar, wala naman tayong balak i-soli ito. At marami na tayong kinabit doon na iba-ibang mga affixes din because of yung pagiging agglutinative ng wika natin. At nabago na rin natin yung meaning ito. So it can also mean yung positionality, yung position mo sa hierarchy. We even have expressions like matuto kang lumugar or wala ka sa lugar. So it has become an important part of yung how we configure space and possession. Pero hindi yung mga susunod, yung mga pinili ko, these are more either developments in Proto-Philippines or development or retentions from Proto-Austronesian. So gusto ko lang ipaliwanag ng kaunti yung lugar. If you're interested, I think si Professor Clement Aquino wrote something about it. May appeared lang, si Joseph shared a paper written by Professor Aquino about lugar and positionality. Now, yung unang gusto kong ikwento o iwagi sa inyo ay yung Banwa. I think it's one of the more important na salita when we're talking about space. And makikita mo ito sa iba't ibang mga wika sa Pilipinas. So these are just some of the examples. Na pag tingnan mo yung semantics yung meaning niya, parang in some languages it means a landing place or a port. In some languages it means sun. It can also mean year. In some it means sky, heaven. Pero karamihan, ang ibig sabihin nito ay town, country, or village, or community, or settlement. Okay. Ang nakakatuwa dun sa term kasi parang ikaw na, lahat na sa'yo. Diba? Kasi in other languages, it even means yung grave naman and the underworld. So mula dun sa underworld hanggang dun sa araw, sa langit, parang pasok siya dun sa idea of the Banwa. Diba? So dun sa reconstruction nito sa Proto-Malayo-Polynesian, it's reconstructed up to the Proto-Malayo-Polynesian level. Ang kinakabit nila dito ang Polugan, it's an inhabited land or territory supporting the life of a community. So lahat ng mga bagay na nakapaloob doon ay kasama doon sa definition nung Banwa. So it's not just the town itself, kundi pati yung mga pinuproduce nung town, pati yung mga paniniwala, yun nga, as I was saying, yung underworld, the grave, the sky, and all of these things. So it seems like yung Banwa is napaka-importante kasi pumapasok lahat yung nasa both physical and spiritual na cosmology natin dito sa definition to. And the idea of supporting in the life of the community, you can also see this in Western Malayo-Polynesian and mga oceanic languages. Now, yung ilang mga kahulugan dun sa mga oceanic languages, these are added meanings dun sa community or inhabited land. Ang nakakatuwa kasi nakikita natin halimbawa dito sa Tongan, Samoan, and Maori na it has an added meaning of the placenta. So it supports the idea of something that's supporting the life of something. Of course, itong additional na mga kahulugan na ito are most likely metaphorical na expansions of the idea of the Banwa, of something that supports, of a place that supports. So, kaya nakakatuwa yung kwento ng Banwa at yung category na ito of place. Kasi parang, ikaw na, lahat na sa'yo. Now, if in some languages, halimbawa, sa Bicol, you find these forms. Like meron kang form na Banwa, pero meron kang form na Banwaan. And that made me think, kasi if you remember, yung an, it's a locative suffix. It's a suffix that turns other words into a location. So you would think na, bakit parang redundant na? Parang community, location na nga, but at the same time, may an pa. So, may pagka-redundant. Although, iniisip ko rin, baka rin kasi yung Banwa is not, hindi lang siya yung physical na lugar, yung village, yung community, yung lupa, etc. etc. Kundi it's also something that is performed. It's also something na ginagawa. Kung kaya, meron kang forms like Banwaan or a place where you perform Banwa or being a Banwa. So that's something to think about. Now, if you look at yung iba pang mga salita, ito pa, nakita ko din. If you're familiar with yung ili, it's already a place. And then, you add a suffix, yung locative suffix din na an. So bakit ganun? Yung reconstruction ng ili, it goes all the way back to dun sa Proto-Malayo-Polynesian na it means, well, batay dun sa iba't ibang mga wika, it points to parang mountain or hill or a village or a town. So ganun yung pagkapakahulugan dun sa ili. Pero what kind of bothers me is again yung existence nung an dun sa ilihan or ilyan in other languages. Kasi again, bakit parang redundant yung if it's a mountain, tapos may location marker ka na, so parang naulit. But then, I think, may special feature din kasi yung definition of the ili. Makikita in some languages na it also means a shelter, a refuge, or a fortress or a kingdom. So it's a place that you go to, para to take shelter, to take refuge. I remember people talking about yung one time pinag-uusapan namin yung tsunami, and some people were saying na ang natutunan nila sa mga matatanda na kapag meron ng warnings of that, na pumunta dun sa ilian or dun sa upper part of dun sa bundok para to take refuge. So it could be na yung ili is not just a place but also something that is performed tulad ng Banwa. Now, speaking of mountains, ito na. Kadalasan, iniisip natin na yung mountain ay yung bundok. At ito naman talaga yung form din ng mountains na makikita mo sa Tagalog o sa Kapampangan. Okay. But in other Philippine languages, yung word for mountain is some form of bukid. Okay? Nagkaroon ng semantic shift dun sa Tagalog at sa Kapampangan kung saan yung bundok, now which means an elevated land, became the mountain, at yung bukid became yung bukid, yung plains, yung fields. I remember a conversation one time I had with someone saying na bakit siya tinatawag na bukid noon, sa bundok naman sila nakatira. Or bakit siya tinatawag na binukid kung sa bundok sila nakatira. The thing is, kung titingnan mo lang yung Tagalog, yun yung may isip mo. Pero if you look outside of yung Tagalog and Kapampangan na bundok, you will realize na in all the other places, bukid really is mountain. At ito yung reconstruction niya sa Proto-Austronesian. It's a Austronesian na retention na namana dito sa mga Philippine languages at nagkaroon ng pagbabago doon sa Tagalog at Kapampangan kung saan mas ginamit na yung bundok to refer to a mountain. Ngayon, kung may bundok ka, meron ka ring dagat. So ito naman ang kwento ng dagat. Para lang akong si Marites, parang daming kwento tungkol sa mga bagay-bagay. So yung dagat, di ba parang pag tingnan yung dagat, di dagat, ano pa ba? Wala nang iba kundi yung dagat, yung tubig, yung sea. And makikita mo nga sa maraming mga wika sa Pilipinas na dagat yung for niya. But you also have these mga yung sa Ilocano at sa Malaweg na it refers to yung sand, tapos sa Kapampangan it refers to the fields. So anong nangyari doon? Parang bakit yung dagat ay yung sea sa ibang mga wika ay naging lupa at hindi ito peculiar lang o unique dito sa tatlong wika ito, kasi if you look at yung pagdating mo sa Western Malayo-Polynesian, may mga ibang, marami lalo sa southern part, meron kang mga languages kung saan ang ibig sabihin ng dagat o yung cognate ng dagat is it refers to land. Okay? Dun sa Balinese and Achenes, it's both land and shore. And in Tetun, it's seashore. So parang bakit may movement dun from sea to land and all of that. Isa sa mga proposed na reconstructed na kahulugan itong dagat, it refers to the literal sea. The shallow part where the sea and the land meet. Kaya it went both ways. But it can also mean na yung mga land meaning ay naging produkto na ito when we stop becoming seafarers, when we move to the land to live in the land. And I am seeing a lot of different lexical items, mga words na may ganung similar type of movement from referring to seafaring na mga terms na ginagamit na dun sa lupa o sa land. Ang halimbawa, isa sa mga halimbawa dito, yung recent lang, yung katig, if you're familiar with the katig. Ito yung, di ba, sa bangka, ito yung parang support. Gaano nyo kadalas naririnig sa mga meeting yung kinakatigan ko ang kanyang proposal, meaning to support something. But that's quite recent. Pero marami rin tayong iba pang mga salita na nagkakaroon ng movement from sea to land. Halimbawa, yung limas. Di ba pag may baha, naglilimas ka sa bahay. It used to refer to, or very specific dati, yung kahulugan niya doon sa yung bailing out of water sa mga sasakyan pandagat. So there are a lot of those. And it could be na yung dagat that means land, it's a later na development doon sa microhistory ng salitang ito. Now, speaking of yung mga sea to land, another example of that, itong pulo. Kasi sa Kuyunon, we have a word na puro, which refers to a forest that looks like an island within an island. Okay. So I think that's interesting kasi it tells you din something about how they structure things and how in their history na napakahalaga sa kanila yung connection nung land at nung sea. Also, this word, This is the last na salita. Dalan, or path made by a human as opposed to an animal. It's also a very common retention in all of these different Austronesian languages. No? These are the different forms, and you can see it in Formosan, in mga Philippine languages, in Western Malayo-Polynesian, Central Malayo-Polynesian, and even down sa Oceanic. Okay, it's a path na man-made. Ito yung Tagalog, daan. So it can mean, like a road or a street and all of that. Pero makikita natin na pagbaba mo dun sa, at least yung reconstructed na meaning sa Austronesian, pero pagdating mo sa Malayo-Polynesian, kung saan kasama yung mga wika natin, nag-develop niya siya ng isa pang meaning, which means yung wake of the boat. Or yung, pag dumaan yung boat, yung makikita mo yung parang pathway, yung parang pinagdaanan niya. Yun yung wake of the boat. And also, in some of these languages din, makikita mo na it also means the Milky Way. And this ties back to sa studies ni Ambrosio, to sa studies ni Dina Brera, tungkol sa yung connection naman of the sea and yung langit. And yung idea of that way. So makikita din siya dun sa may mga naiwan pang evidence dun sa semantics mismo ng salita that tells you of that kind of connection. So ano yung punto ng lahat ng ito? I think napakahalaga nung microhistory, pag-aaral ng wika, yung paghimay nito mga to, doon sa pagtukoy natin ng ating culture history. Yung wika kasi, bagamat kadalasan, iniisip lang natin ito as a means of communication or as a vehicle for artistic expression. What we often forget is that language is also a repository of culture and history. Lahat ng mga mahalagang nangyayari o lahat ng mga markado ay nai-encode dun sa wika. So nasa wika din siya lahat. So kailangan mo lang tingnan yung wika at kailangan mo palalimin lang yung pagtingin dun sa wika. It's also important in the study of yung mga origin ng mga place names, like yung sa toponymy. Kasi kadalasan dun sa toponymy, marami kang mga nakakatuwa na mga false etymologies of things. Ilan na ba yung, di ba, usually yung kwento ng mga pangalan, ng mga origin ng mga pangalan ng mga places dito sa atin. Palaging may isang foreigner pumunta dun sa lugar, tapos misheard something, tapos from then on, yun na yung pangalan nung lugar. Or paminsan din, we're looking at it from a very limited na point of view. An example of it, halimbawa, yung place name na Ginubatan. Now, kadalasan, even dun sa website nila, they're looking at it from a Tagalog na perspective, kung saan yung gubat, okay, yung obvious na root word dito would be a forest. So the explanation is na it was a place that was either forested or deforested. Okay, dalawa yung kwentong nakita ko. But if you look at other languages outside of Tagalog, most languages actually sa Austronesian would have, or at least in the Philippines, would have the word gubat to refer to war. At dahil sa Bicol, kung nasaan yung Ginubatan, hindi naman namin ginagamit yung gubat to refer to forest. So why then that explanation? It's easier to say na it's a place where, pinaglabanan. It's where something happened. So that will point you to perhaps yung history of the place then. While group-specific innovations are important, yung words that are unique to every group, I think it's also important to look at yung mga pan-Philippine concepts. And to look at pan-Philippine concepts, you will have to look at yung language, yung iba't ibang mga expressions ito sa language. Maraming mga pag-aaral paminsan ang nakapaloob lang dun sa Tagalog. Tagalog yung tinitingnan, Tagalog yung na-analyze, and it's as if na yung Tagalog would represent everything. Okay. Halimbawa, isang conference on Psikologiyang Pilipino, I was seated next to a Kalinga woman and she said, let's Tagalog. That's not even true for me as a Kalinga. Yung mga nababanggit doon. Or halimbawa, baka we have to start questioning na rin yung mga ideas of, let's say, sa Pilipinolohiya, like yung loob at labas. Kasi while it's important in Tagalog, it's not important in Bicol. The more important category in Bicol is buot. And I'm sure it's also the more important category in languages in the Visayas, more than yung loob at yung labas. So we have to look at other languages too, in our attempts to define ano yung mga pan-Philippine na mga concepts. Also, para it's also anchored in history and in geography, we also have to look at languages outside of yung genetic Philippines para makita natin kung ano yung connection din ito doon sa iba pang mga wika sa loob ng Austronesian na language family. Are these markers of affinity? Parang are these retentions from the oldest na reconstructible natin na language or yung Proto-Austronesian? Is it something that is shared between, yung mga Filipinos and the Maoris, halimbawa? So importante din na makita natin yun para mailugar din natin yung sarili natin dito sa kasama nitong ating buong language family. And I also think na language plays a very important role doon sa ating attempts at indigenization, yung pag-indigenisasyon ng ating mga disiplina. I think language takes an important role there. At lalo pa dun sa mga attempts din natin ng pag-decolonize ng mga practices natin. So mahalaga yung magiging kontribusyon ng wika dun sa pagtingin sa sarili natin bilang produkto ng ating karanasan at hindi lamang bilang produkto ng post-colony. So I think magandang simulain yung pagtingin at pagtukoy dun sa mga nangyayari sa wika o yung mga kwento at mga chismis tungkol sa mga salita. After all these things that are happening are encoded in the words and in the meaning system na meron tayo. So if this is something that interests you, then you can email me dun sa email address na yan. And lastly, just want to say ingat. And ingat kasi proto-Malayo Polynesian na salita din. That means, to remember, to note. Pero sa atin, it's more to care, to pay attention, and caution. Okay. So these are some references, some dictionaries that I used. So if you have questions, perhaps we can talk about them later.
Thank you very much, Tuting. There's so many things to unpack from your wonderful, insightful, and definitely intellectual presentation. I do have to say before I open this up for open forum, and by the way, you can post your comments, your questions at the Zoom chat that we have right there. Let me just say that while we are listening to your lecture, a lot of us geography faculty were actually chatting in our group chat about everything that you said, and we make references about that from the areas where we come from. So it's a very interesting kind of way for us to also rediscover as well as be awed at the connections between culture and history and geography, and how language becomes the almost like not just a descriptor, but it became kind of a metaphor of the place, really, in very interesting ways. And then later on, maybe at the very end, we can talk more about such kinds of overlap. But maybe before we ask people some questions, I do have to just kind of respond to a few things. No, not in any way an answer or anything, just more as a kind of provocation that you gave. It's true about the word lugar that you mentioned, and I think both of us, Tuting, were speaking about the one that was written by Professor Clement Aquino from the Sociology Department of UP about positionality, lugar, ilugar. And also for some of us who are studying geography, it's also interesting how it finds correlative examples to the works of Tim Creswell and most of the humanist geographers like E. Tuan, Edward Ralph, and Buttermer, who basically says something about being in place, out of place, and all of that. No? So it's interesting too that it gets manifested in the Austronesian language. Also interesting is your idea of, or the linguistic origin of the word Banwa. No, we as an Hiligaynon speaker who was born in Bacolod and raised in Iloilo, we do call it also town, but sometimes it's also conflated with country. The one thing in particular also that of interest is the dagat, the aspect of it, and that talk I gave about 2 nights ago in another talk in another country. I was referring to dialectics, and currents, and I said that the post-colonial way of looking at islands is not the island actually, but tides and currents in the ocean because they are connected. But it's also interesting that when you said something about even dagat, and the conflation of land and shore and water that comes with it is so close to that dialectic example that I also gave in one of the lectures. And dalan and path are also, we call it dalan also in Hiligaynon, and you pointed it out in the map. I do have to say that the word ingat is one word that we differ though. Ingat, as you mentioned, is also rooted in to care. But actually in Hiligaynon where we use it, ingat is actually referring to a fussy, kung baga sa atin, OA na tao, no? Pag ingat, it's a verges on the whiny person, no? Kind of like me, I guess.
I was about to say.
so interesting how so many of these prefixes are markers of location and identity, preoccupation, and how language has captured so much about it, no? And in this, at this point, I would like to open this up for discussion. Or so, if there are some questions or comments from Professor Hernandez's talk, please feel free. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be some kind of further examples, to show whether what the lecture says may be similar or different from your own experience. So let me just open this for discussion. Other questions, comments?
Collab na ito, no? Parang
collab. Sige, sabihin ko na lang
papunta
muna kasi inunahan mo din lang naman. No?
papunta
Last
tayo.
ko na sabihin ko. First of all, siguro Tuting, you need to write this in an article for the Philippine Geographical Journal because we will require this to our Geography 1. As Professor Hermida said in our group chat here, she said this is exactly what she was discussing also in her Geography 1 class. And it's too bad that already passed that topic, no? And also,
basta kailangan nyo akong gawan ng maganda at maayos na mapa.
We'll take care of that. we have cartographers here who are able to do that, and also maybe joint field work with linguistics and geography, since we both of our departments, along with anthropology, are 3 of the departments that do field work every year. So that can be an avenue. And finally, if I may just do a product placement thing here, Banwaan, which is the journal for the Folklore Studies Program, is coming up with an issue this December. And then for next year, there will be 2 volumes devoted to geonarratives. And then that's for the June 2022. And for the December 2022, it's counter mapping. So it's a way of looking at folklore and language and new ways of conceptualizing traditions and mythologies, if that makes sense. May questions ba or comments? Yung mga kasamahan ko kanina, grabe-grabe yung pinagsasabi nyo. Ngayon, wala kayong masabi. Sige lang. Questions? Or... Nahiya ang mga tao, Tuting.
Baka pwede sila mag-submit sa Banwaan.
Oo, pwede kayong mag-submit sa Banwaan. After ng 2020, pa-plug na talaga. No? Sa 2023 naman, disaster yung focus. Tsaka women, no? And sa isang issue. Tapos, after that, yung deathscape Tuting, no? At saka yung mourning and that sort of thing. So, interesting stuff, no? This is
At may
all
conference din yung Folklore Studies Program on identity and place.
sa March, first week of March ata, no? Or second week.
Mag-meeting na kami naluan tungkol dyan.
Oh, so be on the lookout for that. It's interesting. It's kind of an extension to it, and also maybe it will bring you to a different place, no? Sige. May questions. Question po about interaction of language in cyber virtual space. Baka may pwede magtanong. Tuting, paano yung sa although hindi siya related sa talk mo, yung bagong nagte-trending ngayon sa mga tinatawag na marites and all that. Ano kayang ang linguistic explanation dyan? Kasi pangunahan ko na because I'm always the wet blanket anyway in this. Pero para bang it reifies na naman that, they're all names, they're named after women, as though all kinds of things that do those kinds of things are always associated to different kinds of Marie, no? Marife, Marivic, Marites, Marisol. Ano kayang mga doon? Do you think there might be an explanation why it developed to begin with?
May kwan di ba? You see sa marami sa social media na mga I call folk etymologies of yung Marites. Nakakatuwa siya kung ano yung ibig sabihin Marites at yung ibig mga Marie. But I think it's really rooted dun sa Karen phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
So we naghanap din tayo ng counterpart ng Karen in Philippine language kasi yung mga unang, even before bago na uso yung Marites, may mga gumagamit ng Susan to refer to yung Karen at Marites. Pero ngayon, parang Marites na lang yung ginagamit. Pero yeah, I see your point. Although meron din naman male counterpart yung Karen.
Ano ba? Ken?
I think. Meron siya male counterpart.
Sabi ng isa dito, ayan, we have tolits po, meaning tol, anong latest? Parang play on the Marites, which is mare, ano ang latest, no? So, meron din.
So, nakakatuwa yung folk etymologist na yun. Kasi, di ba, kung i-relate natin yun sa folklore, kasi yun yung paliwanag nung mga gumagamit, nung nakararami. It may not be yung the linguistic explanation to it, pero it's the folk explanation to it. So it's part of it now. It's now part of our folklore.
Mm-hmm. Tama, no? May dalawa ditong parang provocation. I'll do the other one first. Para bang comments on general interaction of language and cyber or virtual space. Parang ganun lang pagkasabi. Parang ano kaya ang mga, in a sense, mga neologism ba na nag-develop? I guess ito yata ang question or ang tanong na nag-develop. Bakit parang na-aid ng language yung pag-develop ng mga becomings na nangyayari sa cyberspace, sa virtual space. Although right now wala akong maisip na word in particular to support that. Do you think because na rin, technology?
Actually ngayon, ang bilis-bilis ng pagkalat ng mga neologisms, di ba? Parang it's just a click of a mouse and kumakalat lagi siya kung saan-saan. So mabilis. Pero at the same time, makikita mo rin na yung mga lexical fad, yung mga linguistic fad, madali ring namamatay dahil mabilis din nakapalitan. So, yung shelf life niya, kadalasan ay maiksi din.
Tuting may mga private messages dito, pero may isa ditong, have these similarities always been rooted in these languages, or have they evolved over the years? And now with the prevalence of mixing languages, will more of these similarities be produced?
Ang maganda dito kasi, these are all different things. Kaya it has to be a careful na application of the mga methodologies of diachronic linguistics. Kasi some of the similarities are retentions or namana from an older language, from an older form of the language, the ancestral language. So namana lang siya dun sa mga anak-anak. Now, there are similarities din. Halimbawa, when I reconstruct something to Proto-Malayo-Polynesian language, to Proto-Philippine. In other words, it's only shared by that group. So at some point dun sa history nung language, may nangyaring innovation dun sa language na yon. So wala nga siya dun sa labas ng grupong yon, pero namana siya dun sa loob ng grupong yon. And of course, napaka-vibrant din at napaka-robust nung contact situation natin. Even before the pagdating ng mga Kastila, marami na tayong and yung mga nasa southern part nasa Brunei, or kasi yun ba, yung mga borrowings makikita mo sa salita na galing sa Sanskrit at Persian, it went through either sa Javanese or sa Malay, tapos umakyat sa Pilipinas kasi there was also contact. There's also contact between mga Philippine languages and several Chinese languages.
Mhm.
Pero lahat ito, ang kagandahan nito kasi lahat ito nare-record sa language. Okay? So nagiging witness pa rin ang language dun sa nature of the contact, saka yung intensity nung contact. Pero kailangan nga doon yung careful application of itong mga methodologies na ito para matukoy natin kung ano yung nangyari.
Mm. Ang vibrant kasi, no? Ang vibrant tsaka ang dynamic din, no? Ng changes. Tsaka kung minsan it's kung pabayaan mo lang baka maging under-theorized, pero that's where I think the vibrancy of linguistics as a discipline could unpack some of this by using even historical linguistics as a way of making connections, no? May ano lang dito, may comment lang muna bago isang tanong. Holistic pala yung Banwa, lalo na yung mga apelyidong Magbanwa. Tama, di ba? Si Teresa Magbanwa, itong ating heroine sa Philippine history, no? Tapos nag-thank you lang kanina yung nagtanong to you. Does it follow that certain affixation is because of language shift, or is it the other way around?
What do you mean? If we're talking about language shift, then sometimes some of the affixes are copied in another. Paminsan naman, if you borrow some things, pero dahil hiniram mo na yun, you apply your affixes doon sa mga salitang yun. So, I hope yun yung point. Halimbawa, if you borrow words from, let's say, English, pag ginamit mo na siya in Filipino, you use yung mga affixes natin at yung mga processes din natin, then it becomes a little different. So you have like the graduate or sa scan and all of that. Mahirap hiramin yung mga affixes din kasi usually ang mas madaling hiramin yung tinatawag na mga free morphemes or yung mga words itself kasi hindi sila dependent on other forms.
May isa pa dito, Tuting. Do you think that the complexity of the morphological structures and descriptions of Philippine languages are also an indication of semantic shift?
In a sense na pag meron kang mga salita, pag kinabitan mo ito ng iba't iba pang mga affixes, nagkakaroon ng, kasi yung mga affixes na kinakabit mo, yung mga daldala rin sila, mga meanings sila. So it adds to the meaning of the root word. But it doesn't, kung ang tinutukoy natin na semantic shift is from one meaning to another without the affixes, baka not necessarily.
Tuting siguro on a personal tanong siguro, no, yung ang tendency ng mga tao na maglagay din ng mga words na did you eat na? Yung mga ganun ba na pwede namang sabihin yun siguro in a complete language in either one, no? Pero it also makes it folksy kasi eh. Pero ano kayang mga tendency na ganyan? Affectation na lang ba yan?
Hindi naman folksy. Folksy talaga. Hindi naman, I think it's just part of yung contact situation natin. Lahat naman ng wika ay nanghihiram ka from other languages and you're influenced by other languages. Kaya nga meron kang development of Philippine English dito sa Pilipinas and other different types of Englishes dahil yung English has become a global na wika. So anywhere you go, there's a different type of English, like Singapore English and all of that.
Tama.
Pero sa atin naman kasi, syempre, you encountered these different cultures and these different groups, and hindi naman mawawala dun yung magkakaroon ng hiraman between groups at papasok din yun dun sa wika mo. Although, di ba, may mga kilala naman tayo na maarte lang talaga din. Pero wala kinalaman yun sa wika, may kinalaman yun sa pagkatao nila.
May isa ditong tanong sa'yo, Tuting. What are some instances po where the physical habitat or place where a language originated shaped the vocabulary of that language? Uy, meron kayang example din ito? No?
I would think na, kasi di ba, yung if language encodes yung everything that, that affects you, kung ano yung mahalaga sa'yo, most likely, nandun yun sa wika mo.
Mm-hmm.
And kung kadalasan, kung mahalaga ito sa'yo, marami kang iba't ibang forms marami kang iba't ibang tawag or mayaman yung lexicon mo for that particular thing. A classic example of that, halimbawa, would be yung how we have all these different words for all the processes na dinadaanan ng bigas. Kasi we're generally a bigas, kanin consuming na lipunan. So from binhi to palay to bigas, sinaing, then it becomes kanin, and then pag yung nasunog, may tawag din tayo doon, and then when it becomes cold, it's bahaw, and it becomes sinangag, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Di ba? Kasi ganun ka-importante din sa atin yun. So, in a sense, reflected yun dun sa lexicon mo. So, if kung dun sa lugar mo, halimbawa, meron kang places like you have mountains and you have streams and all of these, and those are important to you, and most likely, enrich din yung lexicon mo dun sa mga bagay na yun. That's also the reason why we don't have a word for snow, kasi it just doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Borrowed lang siya. At saka siguro i-extend ko rin ng example mo kanina, Tuting. For example, then variations ng pastries na rice-based, di ba? From suman to ibos, at least sa Hiligaynon, no? And many other things din na variation doon, no? Even yung mga kalimutan ko ng tawag doon sa pop rice na yun na binibili sa mga provincial sari-sari stores, no? Parang rice din kasi yun eh. Pero it had to be accorded a name, no? Para to capture the kind of delicacy.
Doon sa actually pag-aaral sa language and culture sa yung mga sa culture history, we call it yung words and things. It's a German Wörter und Sachen, something like that. Yun yung tawag doon na if you have if a thing exists dun sa kultura mo, then you have a label for it, and if it's important, you have a label for it.
Bago ko tawagin si Ma'am Darlene kasi may tanong siya, may isa rin akong i-relate lang na isang example sa isang conference na napuntahan ko sa Institute of Australian Geographers. May nag-present doon na taga Torres Strait, no? South, di ba? Islander, Oceania. Tapos nag-present siya ng paper doon sa conference. Hindi ko lang talaga makalimutan kasi interesting siya sa akin. Parang maybe I haven't heard anything like this. Ngayon ko na nakita din ang similarity sa sagot mo kanina, Tuting, especially when it comes to yung various names for rice, di ba? Yung sa kanila naman daw, migrant sila sa Australia. Ngayon, ang practices na ginagawa nila sa Torres Strait ay dala-dala nila dito. Pero ang presentation ng paper niya ay ang different words to describe freshness of food. Yung ganun. So for example, basta dumating na sa point na fresh is when you pick it from the garden or you buy it from the market, fresh, whatever that means. To later on, like say, half a day fresh, may name sila doon, to something that you preserve on the fridge, fresh. So may mga ganun silang layers kasi importante doon sa kanila ang freshness, no? So ito unlike sa rice kanina, medyo tangible, no? Dito naman parang practice based. So at least makikita rin pala yung language din doon, no? Na different
farm to table, kumbaga farm to table na
yes.
experience.
Correct. Oo. Pero interesting lang siya, no? In retrospect na-remember ko kasi he provided words, no? But I wasn't paying attention to it. I was paying more attention to, oh my God, may ganitong level of, of calibrating freshness. Pero ngayon, when I think about it, I should have remembered the terms that he used to describe the level of freshness, no? I wonder, sabi nga nila, may mga Inuit ng mga First Nations, may mga 50 different names for snow, di ba? And because that's the one they see often. Pero I guess the same thing can be said of sa desert, di ba? Sige, tawagin ko si Oni, meron din siguro last questions na lang si Ma'am Darlene tsaka si Ma'am Oni, no? Kasi we have to give you some time to rest din kasi may talk ka pa pretty soon in less than an hour. Ma'am Darlene, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, hi Tuting.
Hi.
Great talk, no? Thank you. Curious lang ako kasi ito lang yung na-observe ko about intonation, no? Sa the way speakers speak a particular language. Parang they speak the same language pero iba-iba ang intonation. Lalo na siguro sa ibang lugar, iba ang intonation sa south kaysa sa north. May mga explanations ba kung bakit? Kaya kung minsan mahalata mo na ang isang tao, taga-norte ka siguro, no? Or taga-sur, parang gano'n, no? With regard to the intonation.
Alam mo agad, diba, sa tunog kung taga saan? Lalo kung taga doon ka rin sa area na yon. Ito yung ginagawa doon sa dialect geography. Ang ginagawa namin nun, umiikot kami sa bawat barangay. Then you get data from every barangay para lang matukoy kung saan ba yung pagbabago ng mga tunog, saan nangyayari, para ma-identify din yung mga boundaries ng iba't ibang dialects. Kasi yung dialect differentiation, parang pag nahihiwalay ka, then, di ba, pag nagkakaroon ng konting split o nahihiwalay kayo, you tend to develop your own ways of doing, well, of saying things. Di ba? So, kasama dun yung intonation, yung kung paano yung mga bitaw. So, yun yung titingnan dun sa dialect geography, tapos kung paano siya ipapaliwanag yun sa social linguistics part of dialect geography. So ilista nyo na yan sa ating mga collab.
Possible collab on field work. Ang daming pag-aaralan pala. Ang daming areas, no, sa Pilipinas alone. This is one example where siguro ang archipelagic nature would really provide diversity of studies and dynamism, no, sa linguistic shifts.
Although, di ba, yung cliché, di ba, napaka-cliché ng mga yung the seas unite and the mountains divide thing, di ba, sa archipelagic na pag-aaral. Nakita ko rin yun sa languages, yung mga languages sa coast ay mas magkakamukha kaysa dun sa nasa inland.
Mm-hmm. As well as yung mga, sige, Ma'am Darlene, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, so I think magandang i-mapa ito, no? Marami tayong mga mapping na pwedeng magawa with respect to language. Yeah.
Maawa kayo sa akin kasi mano-mano ko yan. Kumukuha ako ng mapa sa munisipyo, sinisirox ko yan ng siguro mga 500 times kasi kung 500 words. Tapos isa-isa ko yan gamit ang nandito mga kulay.
Mhm.
Ito yung form dito, ito yung form dito. Na I know na merong technology na to do that. Pero
Meron.
sa
Kanina,
dinosaur, ganun.
earlier you said that this type of work is really something for the OC, and I think you have a job. This job is cut out for you talaga to think because of your
Yeah.
particular ano din sa details sa ganyan. Si Ma'am Oni may gusto lang mag-share about, I guess, directions naman. Ma'am Oni, would you like to use their microphone?
Tuting, magandang hapon.
Magandang hapon.
Kumusta po? Dahil yung directions ay may kinalaman din nga sa geography at sa lingwahe, gusto ko lang i-share yung isa sa mga observations dito sa bahagi ng Batangas, Cavite when it comes to the directions, yung Tagalog nung Kanluran, Silangan, Ibaba, tsaka Ilaya. So, di po ba may mga interpretations naman kasi pag tinignan mo yung dictionary, yung parang pag sinabi nilang Ilaya na norte siya, ay tama ba? At ibaba yung south. Although mukhang may mga, since directional din siya at the same time na ibaba at ilaya ng isang lugar o taas o ilalim, tama po ba? Ng isang lugar. So minsan kapag mag-travel ko, so kunyari kami, nasa ridge kami ng Taal, so mataas kami, di po ba? When we travel papunta sa mga relatives sa southern, hindi southern, mas pababa na part, pababa siya nung ridge, ibig sabihin, doon po sila mas malapit sa Taal Lake, for example. Nagkakaroon ng confusion, no? Parang may tinatawag po sila na word yung biling. Biling means parang naiba yung direction, yung parang hindi mo masundan yung direction kasi nandito ka. That's the word for, biling is that word for a person na nakaka-experience nun. So parang sinasabi kasi na may confusion sa pag bumaba ka, yung parang alin na yung ilaya, saka alin yung ibaba. Because perhaps hindi naman talaga siya north. Hindi ko alam talaga yung sagot dito, pero baka may mga Tagalog speakers din in the same area dyan na pwede magpaliwanag ng confusion na yun. Kasi pag bumaba ka, parang pag sa community na yun, iba na yung interpretation nila ng direction na ibaba o direction na ilaya. So nag-shift or parang nag-iiba siya. Hindi naman, so hindi ko alam kung biling lang talaga, ibig sabihin na nalilito sa directions o talagang nagpapalit siya kasi nanggaling ka from taas, pababa, o from baba pataas, na pwedeng ganun. Pangalawa po, siguro sa community din po namin, makwento ko lang din, yung parang familiarity talaga ng mga tao in terms of direction. So that, ang interesting kasi doon for me, kung kunyari sa amin, pag sinabi namin na sa bahay from our house, sabihin namin na, o papakanluran kami, ibig sabihin, alam na ng tao more or less kung saan kami papunta within the community. Alam nila yung neighborhood na yun kung saan kami papunta. Alam nila na yung ay sitio or pook ganito. Kasi with reference to our house, parang ganon, yung common sa community, hindi sila nalilito na pag sinabi namin na papakanluran muna kami, alam na nila yung neighborhood na yun. Kasi alam nila kung ano yung kanluran, west, no, nung bahay. And anywhere ka pumunta, kahit kaninong bahay ka pumunta, pag sinabi naman nilang Pasilangan sila o Pailaya, may idea ka rin kung saan sila sa neighborhood pupunta. So very, kami particular po sa directions. I guess siguro dahil sa, halimbawa, in a farming community din, na like in our town, hiwa-hiwalay yung maliliit na properties mo, or lupa, o yung mga sinasaka o bukid, yung reference mo sa kung alin ka o saan ka pupunta doon, ay ganun din, no? Pailaya, paibaba, Pasilangan o Pakanluran. So in some communities, interested lang din akong magkwento siguro sa inyo din, sa ibang mga lugar dyan, sa ibang mga audience natin ngayon. Baka ganun din kayong magkwentuhan sa inyong community. Tapos alam na nila exactly anong ibig mong sabihin at saan ka papunta. At hanggang saan yung pupuntahan mo kapag sinabi mo yung mga directions na yun. Interesting lang. Yun lang po.
May magandang paper na sinulat si Christina Gallego, yung kasamahan namin sa department, tungkol sa directional systems in Philippine languages. Padala ko sa inyo yung link. It was published by Oceanic Linguistics sa ANU. At in-explain dun nga, kasi we have different ways of telling yung directions, yung movement of the sun, yung relationship ng sea at ng land, yung mga ganun. Kaya yung mga point of reference, kaya halimbawa sa ibang languages, depende kung nasaan side ka nung bundok.
Yes,
Kasi
yes.
kung nandun ka sa at the western part, then pababa. Kung sa kabila naman sa east, iba naman yung
Yes,
magiging point of reference.
yes.
So, yeah, hinimay niya yun dun sa article. So, padala ko sa inyo yung
Ayun, kasi parang
link.
nagkaka-joke tuloy na kung sino ba talaga yung biling. Di ba? Kung sino talaga yung nalilito at saka sino talaga yung nakaka-follow ng direction. Salamat, sir. Thank you po.
Thank you, Ma'am Oni. May isa din dito na nag-comment to affirm Ms. Martinez's statement. In Bicol, direction words would be Iraya or Iraya, north, Ilahud, south. For biling, our term would be ling-ling, to be confused about one's direction. So, yun, may mga variation din talaga, no? Na
And it shows
malapit.
you yung connection nung iba't iba mga wikang ito.
Actually, may isa din nag-message sa akin. Siguro, this will be the last comment for now. No? Nag-message sa akin dito, one of my students at the semester, sabi lang niya, another thing I noticed about place and language is how my friends from the South, when he refers to the South, he means Las Piñas and Laguna, no? Kasi NCR, would say na, N-A, plus root word to say the present tense of the verb, whereas me, na taga NCR, would say kumakain. For me, nakain means accidentally eaten. Whereas for my friends, this means they eat this food. Yung nakain ba? No? So kahit na yung grammar din siguro, may not really play a role sa idiomatic use sa different parts of Tagalog speakers, no, of the region.
That's also part of yung dialectology nga, kasi iba-iba yung mga variations of all these different languages. Kasi bawat language, meron ka mga several na mga variations. Diba? So, yung nakain, can you imagine sa yung nakain ka ng pating? Nakain ka ng pating.
Pero which means kumakain ka ba ng pating?
Kumakain ka ba ng pating, or where you just happen to be there and may dumating na pating and quite by accident, nakain ka.
Although,
now think about nahigop ka ng sabaw. Parang paano na yun?
ang funny lang kasi sa Hiligay nun, ang pating means pigeon. So wala siyang kinalaman. Pero at the same time, parang it gets like surreal and more like a Salvador Dali depiction. We would love to talk more. Sige.
Last, if you're interested in that kind of linguistics, may mga ginawa na kayo mga dialectological studies of the different, yung mga Tagalog variations. So,
sana may way para namin, no, makita, and then this conversation, kasi itong mga nag-question sa akin from economics, from geography, from political science, interested, no, para makita din. It made them reflect, I guess, the way language develop, but also the usage and the practice, and that I think is interesting din. Yan, please do remind me of the opposite word for Ilaya in Filipino. I guess nagtatanong ba talaga to? Anong opposite ng Ilaya sa Filipino?
Ilawud.
Ilawud. Tsaka Ilaya, ibaba between Tagaytay Ridge and Taalay. Interesting din yan, Oni, kasi very specific sa particular place, no? Kasi volcanic. So baka may mga different ways of describing directions, paths, cardinal points, no? Alam ko, nagsabi na ako kanina, wala na akong sabihin, pero hindi ko ma-resist na i-add na lang itong panghuli, yung sa mga lumad, no? When I did, when my colleague and myself, Prof Amorsola and myself did mapping workshop among the K-12 lumad here in UP before the pandemic happened, we asked them to draw something. Tapos na mag-draw na sila to talk about their home and their community, wala kaming binigay na rule. Unang-una, may rules kami. Tapos kami, intuitively, while we were talking, sabi namin, nag-decide na kami right there and then sa lecture namin, natanggalin na namin yung aming dala. Kasi 'di ba nakakasira sa kanilang cosmology. Tapos ito lang ay paki-drawing kung saan kayo nakatira sa UP, tapos saan kayo pupunta no? Classroom. Nag-drawing sila. Tapos, sa mga taga-UP sa atin dito, depende kung anong point of view mo. Kung sa Palma Hall ka, nakatingin ka, or College of Education, alam mo kung anong lay ng land, no? Opposite mo yung law, yung engineering, opposite ng arts and science. Sa kanila, ang drawing nila, wala silang regard for cardinal points. Sa kanila, mas lived in yung environment, no? So although hindi naman ito sa language na, pero nagpupunta na rin ito sa mga topographical questions, no, pang sense of place ba. Pero I'm sure may term din sila siguro sa mga ganong klase. Pero natuwa lang kami nang hindi makita ko ay dito, ano kaya, titingnan namin kung anong perspective to tingnan. Pero hindi, nakita namin na this is how they see it with their very particular identity politics, no. So sige. Anyway, Tuting, alam ko kasi may talk ka pa in about 30 minutes, no, sa Linguistic Society of the Philippines. So hindi ko na ito papatagalin. To show our appreciation, the UP Department of Geography is giving a certificate to our speaker for sharing his valuable insights and expertise this afternoon. So this certificate of appreciation is presented to Jesus Federico Hernandez for the valuable insights and expertise shared as virtual speaker for the talk Reconstituting Space, Exploring a Place Lexicon in Philippine Languages for the Geography Webinar Colloquium Series, given this 4th day of December 2021, signed by myself as chair of the department and Dominique Sasha Amorsolo as the coordinator of the webinar series. Thank you again, Tuting, for sharing your research. Before we end the program, let me just share with you our announcements from the Philippine Geographical Society and co-sponsored by the UP Department of Geography. On December 18, we will be having the launch of our Philippine Geographical Journal, volumes 57 to 59. The society has an open call for membership. Kindly visit our website, PH Geographical Society, for details about how you can join the society. Lastly, past sessions are lodged. Past sessions, I mean, these talks are lodged at the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. Kindly visit the site to watch our past episodes of the Geography webinar.